I was at school, and this school in South London, and had no idea about being an actor. And the new English teacher there, who later became, he's called Michael Croft, later founded the National Youth Theatre, which is still going strong today, as you may know. He decided to do Shakespeare there at the school. Was I off?
You were off.
Yes, but my voice is fine.
Exactly. It's only me that needs it.
And the school was founded by one of Shakespeare's great actors, Edward Alleyn, and so it was called Alleyn School. So this chap decided to revive the idea of doing Shakespeare in the school. He did the play Julius Caesar, a modern dress, open air, and because I was good at something called reading aloud, my little brother I used to read to a lot, I got the part of Mark Antony, which I don't know, you'll all have heard of Mark Antony, but certainly those who know the play know that it's the most wonderful, showy part. And I did that. I had no idea, but that was terribly exciting. But that didn't do it. The next time I was having got the acting bug, the Gilbert and Sullivan operetta, which some of you might know, called Iolanthe. And it has a very famous patter song in it, which is rather difficult to get your mouth round and all that. And I did this, and I came home, and I knew what it was. Well, for the first and probably last time in my life, I knew what it was to hold an audience in the palm of my hand. And I came back and said, I want to do this. And my parents, instead of howling with derision or dismay, as was the fashion in those days, realised that they had a 15-year-old who really did know what he wanted to do, which is quite a good thing for a 15-year-old. Doesn't really know what he wants to do. So they were very encouraging, so I became an actor. And when I went to RADA and all that stuff, but the first time I really knew what I wanted to do was I went to Stratford-on-Avon and to see what's called the Shakespeare Memorial Theatre then, now called the Royal Shakespeare Company. And I saw Laurence Olivier, in Titus Andronicus. And I just came out of thinking, I've got to be on that stage. I've got to be involved in this sort of work. And so I then auditioned and I got into that, became a walk-on actor in that and worked my way up over 3 years and just quite small parts. And I've always been, classical is such a portentous word, but my eyes have always been on plays of that kind. The great plays in our language, which we're so lucky to have. But I've done lots of other things in between. That's where I've been so lucky, is that I managed to make all these movies as well and be a quite successful stage actor and quite successful television actor, but never a big star. And that, for my money, that's been wonderful. Because I'm known. You wouldn't be here now this minute if you didn't sort of even vaguely recognise either the face or the voice or something. And so I am sort of known, but I'm not besieged in the streets. I'm occasionally asked for my autograph, and I like that. That means I'm still current. I'm still going. You've got to keep yourself going. I was very ill a couple of years ago, and I went out of vision, and people didn't know who I was. And oh, cracky! So I'm back now. I'm back now. But the answer to your question is I've always had, from that Stratford beginning, I've been in all but 3 of Shakespeare's plays. Been in, I wouldn't say starring in or anything, but I've been in them, and I'm a Shakespeare freak, and I can't help that. But I love being one because he's so helpful to me in my life. But as I say, I've been terribly lucky to have done these very, very large franchise films, which means that I can come to things like this and hopefully make a few quid and meet things. I'm afraid you're called fans. Sorry about that, but you are called that, and I'm bloody glad to meet you. I do quite a lot of these now because I'm old and the parts are running out. And seriously, You got to my age and there aren't the parts around. If there are, they're played by Michael Gambon. So I do a lot of these, and I meet a lot of people, and it's part of the pleasure of doing these things is by meeting you. And you come up to my table, you buy my photograph, and we have a little chat about your life and a bit about mine. What happened at that moment in that film? Someone was saying, I'll quickly explain, and you get a contact with people, and that is why I enjoy it. This is what I enjoy, seeing your faces, because you're here because you want to be here, which is. I can't ask for anything more, really. That's a short answer to your question.
Can you remember what your audition piece was for the Royal Shakespeare? You remember what you did? Have I got you on the spot?
I've never been asked that before.
Yes!
This is my great buddy who knows all about me. No. Oh, yes, I can. Yes, I can. It was a speech of Hotspurs from Henry IV. Yes.
Well done.
Yes.
And did you actually audition in front of Olivier, or was
No, he wasn't at it.
Right.
The company. It was for the people who ran the theatre.
Right. Okay.
And I was tall, and they employed about 6 tall actors that year in order to stand in front of the lights, or behind the main characters. You know, it happens in films a lot that as you know, there are a lot of professional extras, people whose living is being extras, and they do that. Anybody here do that?
I have done it, yes.
Well, you know this thing then, of you try to get behind the leading actor somewhere. That means that you've got to be in that shot every time he's on. And you're behind the leading actor in that scene, you've got a couple of days' work.
Tip for you all out there.
And that's how I started off there and built my way up.
And then you went to the National as well, didn't you? So
Oh,
you worked
yes.
for the 2 big, theatre companies.
Well, I've been to the RSC, did 3 full seasons at Stratford and at the Barbican and all sorts of other places. In fact, I spent 13 years of my life altogether with the Royal Shakespeare Company, and I've done 3 shows at the National. I was in a play which opened. I'm so sorry, I'm so boring. Bye.
See you again. Missing you already. We're not.
I don't know what to say now. The opening show in the Littleton Theatre I was in was Tom Stoppard's Jumpers, which was absolutely terrific. Then I did Arnold Wesker's not The Kitchen, what's it called?
Caretaker?
No, it doesn't matter. I've done the 3 plays there. The last one being The Voysey Inheritance, which is an absolutely superb play, which I adored doing. And so I've knocked around the National too, yes, and done a lot of touring. And when you reach an age, you do all these things. I've been all over the country touring, and abroad quite a lot touring with plays. And my one-man show, which you saw a tiny bit of there, that was Beowulf, by the way. It's a great old English story, which university students normally have to go through the whole thing of, oh God, Beowulf, in the old English, oh Jesus, and so difficult and so boring and tiresome. And my thing was to bring it to life and make sure that people hear it as it was spoken when it was first written, and as a dramatic piece. And that was a little tiny bit of it. And the bit after what you saw is the really exciting bit, when he comes face to face with the giant creature called Grendel. And that was my idea, to show people that it's a fantastic piece of work. Not for nothing is it celebrated as the first proper piece of English literature ever written. And that's why I do that. I put that to bed. I did a one-man show about my sort of godfather, Robert Graves, the great poet, which was a tremendous privilege to do that too. So I've invented a lot of my work. I've always thought, well, for practical reasons, because an actor's life is so varied, sometimes you're out of work for 6 months now, that you should have something up your sleeve you can do on your own, which doesn't, oh, you've come back, bless your heart.
I told you.
Yes. He's been to have a wee-wee. An actor should have a one-man thing that he can do without anybody else having to help him. He doesn't need lighting or anything. If he can have those things, very nice. But and so that's why I did those 2 pieces of one-man theatre. I can't think what else to say now. What do you want?
The transition from stage to television. How did that? Because obviously.
Well, it didn't happen as a transition because it wasn't moving from one area to another. Right. With most actors, I think you'll find, you'll be speaking to Ian Cullen soon, and he'll say the same. That it mingles up. It depends what you're offered, frankly. Very few actors that I know have been able to choose throughout their career. They might go through a period when they're able to choose, 5 or 10 years maybe, then it all goes away again. So I started off in the theatre, and then I was offered a little tiny bit part like that in a Ronnie Barker comedy show in which I played a German soldier, and my dialogue was, "Raus, raus!" Brilliant interpretation. I got a lot of work from that. And then I did a long television series, and then I did a film. Lucky I got a film, worked at the Royal Court Theatre, which is at that time, well still is, a seat of experimental drama, and worked with those people, Albert Finney and people in their youth, in my youth too. And it all mingles in. My first film was a film which I do hope you've all seen, and if you haven't seen, honestly, just get it up on your television. Tom Jones, Albert Finney, Tom Jones, a piece of wonderful, raucous, ridiculous 18th century comedy, which is funny, and you see the gorgeous young Finney, the gorgeous young Susanna York, and all these actors who go, oh, I've seen it. Oh yeah, it's full of those sort of actors that you'll recognise from whatever you've seen in those old films. I beg you all to look it up. It's only 90 minutes long. Look it up and watch Tom Jones, because you'll really enjoy it. That was my first villain in that, and it was my first film. So how lucky I was, because it's not only now a very famous film, but it started me on a career of
villains,
playing complete arseholes. With the odd nice person thrown in here and there, but nobody ever remembers those.
So you've done, but I say franchises. I think with the exception of Star Trek, which must be an oversight, you've done everything else.
Everybody else is oversight. I quite agree with you. What were they up to?
It started again, though. I mean, you know, if old Picard can come out of retirement, I'm sure that you could come in somewhere. You know.
Oh, sure. Yes, I suppose I could, because I'd be a new character in it. Because normally I don't do sequels to films, because I'm always dead. I nearly got a sequel, a tiny little part in the third Star Wars film, because it wasn't clearly established that I was killed in it. There was a little tiny appearance of him, which they said, if you come and do it, maybe we can make it a bit bigger. Well, I wasn't free to do that, which is a pity. It would have been nice to have been able to say I was in 2 of them. It would have been nice. But sequels are not known to me. No.
What was it like doing Star Wars? Obviously, it was the second one, so it was already kind of established as a big film and all the hype around it. And then the second one. What was it like, kind of coming into that?
Well,
world?
we had no idea what it would be like, because we knew the first one, which there's no one of my age here, but when it first hit our screens, we young people were just knocked sideways by Star Wars. Nowadays, Star Wars type films are 2 a penny. You see these fantastic airplanes flying around and doing ridiculous things, but in the beginning of Star Wars, first one, when those planes came down between all those rocks and down through those gullies, we could not believe our eyes, because cinema had played with that sort of thing before, but in a very minor way. I had never really got to grips with it, and Star Wars got to grips with it, and we were thrilled out of our heads, and so was everybody else. It wasn't just us. So when the second one, pure nepotism, I got that one. I live next door in Barnes, still do in the same house, but he's gone, to the executive producer on the Star Wars films, a man called Robert Watts. Fine fellow. Well, I think he's a fine fellow, because one day I was mowing the lawn and he put his head over the fence and said, we're doing a second Star Wars film. Do you want to be in it? And I said, well, what's it? And he said, it's only a week's work, but it's quite it's a very small part, but it's quite a nice one. And so I did it, and was appallingly paid, really appallingly paid. But since when I've multiplied my fee by doing things like this by several hundred, I think. It's just remarkable. And he got me into that, and we had a great fun week. My non-conversation with Darth Vader and driving that thing, attack. I did that whole scene, which you saw a bit of, in that machine, which I did the whole scene, and I didn't know what I was driving until I saw the film. Oh, that giraffe! I was driving that, was I? It's really, I must tell them about that sequence. It's awful. They did it, they put me on a gantry, like a sort of crane thing, put me up very high. Behind me was a green screen, and that was it. And there was a sort of mock-up control panel in front of them, not the one you saw, but a microphone. And I did the scene. They shook me around a lot, and I didn't know what I was driving, but I did the scene. And it was quite... You wouldn't think it was, but the dialogue was such rubbish. It meant nothing to me at all. But I got through it manfully until one point and one phrase I simply couldn't get right when I got to it. And I took 16 takes on it. And I'm now going to tell you the line that I could not recall. Ready? Your ears are open. Target the main generator. They were very patient with me, but I think they were glad to get rid of me that day. It's extraordinary the way the man can do that. I'm a very good study normally, but that's what we call a good study. But that has happened, and it becomes a manic thing that you can't remember that line. And it happens in the theatre. Anyway, that's that story. I've done that story.
Every time I see
you were guiding me towards that one, weren't you? And then, following that, the same nepotistic contacts, the same guy, suggested me for a part in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and I went up for the part of the Nazi sergeant, you know that, and I went up and auditioned for that and didn't get it, and then I heard who was going to do it, who was with my agency as well, Michael Byrne, and I said, oh, of course it's Michael Byrne, it's got to be. I mean, his face is so right for that, and he's such a good actor, and I felt quite generous and quite nice about it, until 2 days later I was rung and said, will you go along and see them for Walter Donovan? What? And I did, and I went along and did a thing called an American accent at it and got it, and that almost changed my life, that film. Wonderful part, working with those fantastic people, and Steven Spielberg. It was just such a wonderful job, and I got the accent right. Oh, there's a good story about that. I worked very hard on getting the right sort of Boston accent, and at the end of one big day, we've been in tanks and things all day. We're all very hot and sweaty and out in the desert, and 102 in the shade. And at the end of the day, Stephen just wandered up and said, "Julian, you know, your American accent is really so good. And from now on, you'll never stop making American movies." Never again.
What does he know? What does he know? So how did the role of your Kristatos, the James, again, another franchise, James Bond?
That came, the idea was my agent, thank goodness for a good agent.
Yeah.
And I was doing oh, Karen, you will start me off.
I know.
I'd been through a very bad patch, and we were thinking, oh, we've got to let the house go. We'd let the car go. We've got to let the house go, and it was that sort of area. My agent rang and said, there's this film being made in Athens. It's a Roman film, you know, Roman army film, starring Anthony Hopkins, and they want you to be in that for 6 weeks or whatever. The money's not wonderful, but I said, yes, because I obviously wanted to do it. And film with Tony is always a nice thing to do. And so we booked up for my wife Isla Blair and my little son to come out with me, and we got this place by the Corinth Canal, which is near where it was going to be filmed, and booked them all in for a holiday to go with me and all that. And a week before, there was a Screen Actors Guild strike in America, and the whole film was called off. And so there was my life now devastated, with my wife and my son were booked in to go to Corinth. Well, I wasn't going to go. I didn't have the money. It was awful. And then my agent rang and said, come along on Saturday morning. I said, no one gets any work on Saturday morning. He said, just go along and see John Cleese, it happened to be, about this thing they're doing. And to cut the long story short, it was a sort of drama documentary about Alexander the Great Greek leader, and to play his father, who was a very well-known fellow in his day. And it was very badly paid, but it happened to be filming in the same area. So my parents went out first. My children, my wife and son went out first. My parents had gone long before that. And they were there about 4 days before I arrived. Anyway, and I did this pretty tacky thing which no one's ever going to see. And I don't think anybody has seen it. I did it, and in the middle of that, I was rung by my agent and said, they want to see you for the Bond film. Well, that was from the ridiculous to the other ridiculous, the idea of being in a Bond film. And I said, well, I can't, I'm here, I'm working. Can you get over for Sunday? I said, no, I'm working on the Saturday morning. And my agent said, well, we're talking about a Bond film here, Julian. And I said, oh, well, I'll try. And I went to the first assistant, and when I'd removed my tongue from his arse, said, would you please, can you try to fix it so I finish early on Saturday morning? And he was very sympathetic, because he understood how important it would be, and he did. And so I finished this scene about 11:30, and still had the makeup on. I didn't go in my Greek costume, but a car into Athens, and Athens got a plane to Frankfurt, a plane to London, and just about made it. And on the Sunday morning, I went in and went for an interview with Cubby Brockett and all that lot. And it worked, as you know it worked. And I couldn't believe that I'd got this thing. And I had, on the Monday morning, I was back on the set at 7 o'clock in the morning, you know, as one is on films, and I bought the whole crew a drink, of course. And that's how I actually got that part. Out of despair, you never know how this business is going to go, out of despair came forth this glorious thing called a Bond film. I'm playing the baddie in a Bond film. And for my money, I mean, I don't ask for any praise for my performance in it, but the reason that's filmed For Your Eyes Only was successful was because they decided in that one that they would stop all the magic, as it were, you know, press a button and the building would blow up over there. that Bond had to do everything better than anybody else. He could ski better, he could drive better, he could shoot better, he could bobsleigh better, blah, 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 which was a good idea, which meant that the villain, or villains, must be real people, not people with hooks on the end of their arms, or hats which flew and killed people, or even cats in their arms. They were people, recognisable people. And that's why the part that I played was a recognisable person. And some people, some audiences have understood why that bloke was like he was. And that's the same with Indiana Jones. What would you do for the secret of eternal life? You kill your mother. Yeah. You would. So call him a villain if you like in Indiana Jones. He was a very practical man who discovered the secret of eternal life, and he wanted it. And I won't be long, Ian. I'll just be about another hour. You can't stop me talking. Anyway, so that's how all that came about. And I do burble on, don't I? I've got to stop.
No, you're
I've got to
I
stop.
love it. I could listen to you for hours, you know that. It's great, it's great.
I think we'd better answer some questions, wouldn't we?
Yes, some questions, and then we'll have Ian up. So has anybody got any questions for Julian?
Or have I answered them all already?
I know we haven't touched on Game of Thrones, but we'll do that
Good morning.
later. Or we might have talk about Doctor Who later, who knows? Hands up for Julian. Gentleman down in the front is always first, I love him.
Hello, sir.
Hello.
Lovely to meet you again. Throughout your illustrious career, long and illustrious career, which actor have you most enjoyed working with? And who, if you can say, have you least enjoyed working with?
Who have I not enjoyed working with? That's what you really want to hear, isn't it? The one I least enjoyed working with was in a film called The Magus. It was all filmed out of Mallorca, all very nice, starring Michael Caine and Anthony Quinn. There you've got your answer. Michael Caine is divine. Anthony Quinn, I was warned before on the first morning, his first assistant came, said, he's all right, but he'll ask you to play chess with him. Lose. And that's where we were. We had one very complicated scene. I won't tell you what it was all about. And he talked to me about it beforehand, and he agreed to do this, and I agreed to do that. When we came to it, he didn't do what he said he was going to do. It was a deliberate ploy to put me into a bad position. I hated him, absolutely hated him. My favourite actor, there are so many favourite actors I've worked with. If you do a good job, I'm sure Ian would agree with this, if you do a good job, a lot of the actors in it become your favourite people in the world, because working on a project is a joint business, and it occupies all your heads, and you can either all hate each other, which sometimes happens, but usually you end up loving each other. But there are certain actors, I adored working with Laurence Olivier, and I only had a tiny little bit to do with him. Charles Lawton, who was terribly bad as King Lear, I had something to do with, but he was wonderful as Bottom in The Dream. A glorious, wonderful person to work with. And people I've never worked with, Ian, but people of our sort of level, Ian and my level, I've worked with so many of those who one becomes really friendly with, but maybe only for the length of that job. Because we so dash around doing things, and you think, this bloke's going to be a friend for life, and you'll do a couple of phone calls and maybe have a dinner or meet for a drink, and then it all goes away until 4 years later when you meet in Shaftesbury Avenue, and you find actually all you've got to talk about is the job you did together. Which doesn't mean it's any less affection, but that's how it goes. So I'm sorry it's difficult to answer your question, but I've burbled on enough to answer it, haven't I? Thank you.
We'll have one more question, and then we'll bring in on Gary.
Julian, you're known as primarily a very serious actor in the sort of roles that you take. Would you have liked to have done more comedy roles?
Yes.
Anything specific?
It's funny, in the business, if you are something called, oh God, I hate these words, but a serious actor, people are wary of giving you comedy roles. One of my, I have to say, greatest successes in the theatre has been the comedy role of playing someone who actually existed, Dr. Johnson's nemesis, James Boswell, who was a little, I'm not little, Scotsman who followed Johnson around everywhere, wrote a definitive biography of him, and we depicted on the stage, myself and Timothy West played Dr. Johnson, and I was terribly funny in it. I really was, provided with fantastic text, of course, but I was funny in that, and that's never been picked up, and I've only done comedy about 3 times after that. My son is the same, exactly the same. And he's done a lot of comedy, and every time he does comedy, people say, "Oh, you've got to be in one of these a soap. Not a soap, a situation comedy. You've got to do." And it's never happened for him. And he carries on being the same guy. He was the play called Noises Off, which is one of the, I think, the funniest play in the English language, in which he was hysterical. And everyone said, "You've got to be doing this." And it didn't happen because he's a thing called a serious actor. And Ian will agree with this, that the minds, you don't know what happens in their minds, the producers, and they're wonderful, and they certainly think about things, but they come to sorts of conclusions, like when you've been ill, that you're going to be ill again. Why should you be ill again? You know, we've all been ill, but we get better, don't we? Until we don't. Anyway, that's the short answer. Sorry,
I think it's about time we brought the lovely Ian Cullen on. So we're going to now transfer from, was it Maester something Kristatos, to the early historicals, or the early hystericals. I'm not quite sure which we're going to get this afternoon. So I'd like to introduce Mr. Ian Cullen to the stage.
I stay here. I stay here. See. Let's put him in the middle.
Okay.
Watch the wire.
Thank you very much.
You're in the hot seat, Ian.
Off you go.
In you go.
Watch the wire.
Watch the wire. Watch the edge. Brilliant.
Sit here.
Sit there.
Lovely. Oh, you're going to sit there? Oh, right.
wanted
Okay,
to.
you're staying with me.
Oh, you're the...
Oh, yes.
Oh,
yes.
sorry
one happy
about that.
family.
He's got to hold my hand.
Yes, it's all happy families.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
I'll have some water too while I'm here.
Fizzy.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, not fizzy. The blue boy.
The blue boy.
We share early Doctor Who.
Early
Which
Doctor
is
Who.
why we're here. Let's talk about early Doctor Who, because we haven't talked about Doctor Who at all, and I think that's why we're all here this afternoon. I'm not
So long
quite sure.
ago, I can hardly remember it.
Don't say that, I'm relying on you.
Right, okay.
So, gentlemen, you both did very early Hartnell Doctor Who.
Yep.
And again, historical stories, because that, at the time, it was supposed to be educational and informative, and that's why we had the Aztecs in your case, and we had the Crusades in Julian's case.
Wonderful.
First of all, what are your memories of William Hartnell? Obviously, we need to, he's no longer with us and passed away before most of this kind of fandom craze happened. So, what are your memories, Ian, of working with
It's a question that comes up, obviously, quite a lot.
Yeah.
Because William Hartnell had a reputation, which I'm sure you've all heard a lot about. But I was a very young actor when I did the Aztecs. And one thing that William Hartnell was he was very kind to young people. He wasn't so kind to older people because he expected them to know their jobs and get it right. And he could be very impatient. But again, part of that impatience, I think, came from the fact that he himself wasn't all that young when he started doing this, and it was a mammoth task. It was very hard work, and he had a lot to carry on his shoulders. And he was, I think, partly frightened of not getting it right himself. And he worked terribly hard, and he used to get, if he'd got a scene right and somebody else messed it up, he would get cross with them. But I always found him very, very kind and very helpful. And he's one of the people, I think we wouldn't be here now, actually, if it wasn't for William Hartnell.
No, I agree with that.
Because he was I think you were talking a little bit about this earlier, but William Hartnell actually believed it. He wasn't acting. He wasn't having a bit of fun. He played it very, very truthfully and for real, and it was that reality which I think gave Doctor Who longevity, and meant that other people could come along and follow in his footsteps. I don't know quite where it is now because I haven't watched it for a while, but certainly the first few series, after William Hartnell, they stayed with the ethos that he laid down, and he insisted that everything be done for real. There was no playing down to children or anything like that. It was all absolutely, and that's why it was so frightening. Because again, he said it's got to be truthful. If you're going to be frightening, frighten them. Don't soften it. So I was a great admirer. I mean, I've always remembered him with huge affection. And if other people say something different, it's probably because they were older than I was when they went to work with him. Perhaps they made more mistakes. I don't know. But no, I loved him.
Yeah. And Julian, again, you've worked with Hartnell.
He's so generous. And I think you're probably right on all those things. I found him deeply unpleasant, and he took an anti-shine to me and to Jean Marsh, who played my sister in it. Because we represented, well, this is our uncharitable interpretation, we represented a sort of theatre which he would never be associated with, and he was deeply resentful of us. Unlike Roger Moore, who called me Mr. National Theatre, William Hartnell didn't extend to that. He didn't like us, frankly, and was obstructive, difficult, critical. And we did remember our lines.
I'm sure you did.
But everything you say, I agree with. Everything you say. But we had a very unpleasant run of it, and it's not a job which I remember with any pleasure. That I did do with great pleasure. The second one I did with Tom, and so there you go.
Yeah, but I've got to add to that I didn't actually have a lot to do with William Hartnell, personally. I had very few scenes with him. All my scenes were mainly with Bill Russell and.
Oh yeah, nice talking.
You know, we and so when I say he was always encouraging, because I wasn't in the scenes with him very much.
You weren't a
That's
threat.
great.
And so he used to watch, and he would say, "That was great, well done," you know, and really encourage and be very good. But I didn't get much chance to annoy him. So,
I just had an hour with him outside. Believe you me, he would have been annoyed if you'd had an hour with him.
Oh dear. I was watching the clip that I showed of you in the Crusades. The language came across as. It struck me. I hadn't noticed it before. I was watching the clip. Very Shakespearean in the way you were delivering it, and.
Oh God, was it?
No. It was very. It's not the kind of dialogue or delivery that you would see on television nowadays.
It wasn't. Yes, I think that my particular episode, which was about Richard the Lionheart, and absurd, wonderful story, typical of Doctor Who. I think they heightened the dialogue in order because it was so old-fashioned. The story was so old-fashioned.
Yes.
And it was set in Richard the Lionheart's time, which is a long time ago, and they put a sort of archaic theme to it. It might almost have been written in that old archaic lettering. I think you're right about that. A bit declamatory and
and obviously because your love of language anyway with the Beowulf and the Shakespeare. I just wondered if that script had appealed to you.
No,
was it just a job?
It didn't appeal to me with that because it was a nice job.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do it because it was money. Good pay. In those days, because it was so new then, wasn't it? Yeah. Doctor Who. We didn't know whether it was going to be good or not or whatever.
well, actually, one of the things that I think we sometimes forget is that television was pretty new. And itself, most of the people working in television around about that period had actually come from the theatre, from theatre background, and the the technicians, the directors, were mostly theatre directors, and they were learning their jobs. They were learning how to do television. The designers messing about with things, which was even funnier when they went into colour and got that all wrong.
Oh God, yes, that.
It was the cameramen. Everything was new, and they'd practiced it, and they'd done plenty before, done quite a bit, but it was still a very experimental medium. And the writers, particularly, were having problems because they were writing plays. They were writing in continuity, and we recorded them like a play in continuity, and then you picked up the mistakes at the end. Where now they do it what they call discontinued recording. They do it bit by like a film. So it was quite a different medium altogether. And those huge cameras, cumbersome great things they were, weighed 2 ton or something.
Was it difficult for you with your kind of with theatrical training, making that transition to being aware of camera angles and don't step over that cable and I've got to be facing here and
It was a different discipline then, wasn't it?
It was different.
4 cameras.
Yeah.
And you had to know which one to play to, and yes, you did have to watch out for cables.
Yeah. I mean, did some actors find it hard? You think, oh no, I can't cope with this. I'm going to go back to the stage.
We were young.
Young, reckless.
And the money was good. No, but it was. I mean, one's often asked, what's the difference between acting for film or acting for television or acting in the theatre? And my answer, you may not agree with this, but my answer is that fundamentally there's not a lot of acting is acting. And if you get it right, it's simply a case of you're playing slightly smaller. If I play to this room, I'm doing it like this, but with a microphone, that's unnecessary, and it's actually over the top. Sounds bad. So I can use the microphone. The microphone helps me to get across. And it was the same with all the other technical things, cameras and everything else. The actors learned how to use them, but the actual acting job is the same job. It doesn't matter what the medium is, radio or anything else. You just got to be truthful and make it real. Yeah?
Well, a good example of that is a simple thing of I love you very much. And I love you very much! One is, oh, and he goes away. I mean, in fact, it wouldn't occur to an actor to do the other thing. Yeah. And most actors accommodate very well according to the size of the room, where the microphone is, etc., etc., etc. But there has crept in over the last few years, and this is not just being an old actor critical of young people, because I think the standard of acting is so high now, it's fantastic, it is to come down too low.
You can't hear them.
Particularly on television, where there's nothing to do with bad old ears, it's you simply can't hear them.
Big movies, big movies. I call it the Mutter School of Acting. Yes.
It is absolutely infuriating. Yes, well, I won't go on about it. You know what I'm doing.
But one of the earlier things you learn in training as an actor, if you're fortunate, nothing to do with media, you learn to accommodate, to play to the room that you're in, and if you're in a small room, you don't do a big performance. It's common sense, isn't it? Because you actually give people a headache. If one's saying "I love you" in a small room. If it's a big room, of course you have to project to a bigger room, yeah. So the performance changes. The actual technique of getting the words across changes, but the performance doesn't change. And that's the secret.
Yeah. Did you do any of the live Zcars?
The what?
The live Zcars episodes, Ian?
No, I never did. I did 2 live episodes of Emergency Ward 10.
And what was that like to do?
I knew when I was frightened.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But there was, you see, the writing. A lot of it comes down to the writing. If the writer writes well for the medium that you're working in, the job's easy. But some of the earlier ones, where you had a playwright from the theatre who had written a television script, and he would actually forget that actors had to change their costumes and things like that, and so you would have all sorts of complications because they were writing continuously, as they would in the theatre, and on television sometimes you'd be changing your clothes in off stage for the next scene, while you were shouting the end of the previous scene from off stage, because there'd been no allowance made for nowadays they would put a buffer scene in automatically. They would cut away, give the actor 3 minutes to change, and then they would go back to go back to the next scene.
Yeah, yeah.
But the writers really had to learn their job, and it was quite difficult for them. Now we've gone the other way, that there are very few writers around. I say this, I hope I won't get shot down by anybody outside the room, but they're finding it quite difficult to find writers who can actually write a play. Two or three people talking for 2 hours continuously is not easy to do, and it's not easy to find people who can do it now because they're weaned from television. They're learning their jobs in television and film. And if you say, write me a play, they write you a play in 20 short scenes. Very difficult. It's all changed.
Yeah.
It's all changed.
Talking about change, Julian, how had Doctor Who changed between when you in the 60s, when you did Crusade, up until The City of Death with Tom and Lala?
Well, it changed from William Hartnell to Tom Baker.
Tom Baker.
That's how it changed.
Lovely
It was a bit. The sets were more elaborate. They spent more money on them. It was a one-camera job rather than a four-camera job. And that four-camera job was really quite tricky for us all. You know, and they were live. The stage managers on it, which is your job, would have the script, and they had a little thing in the hand. You know those lights where you press a little button and it goes on and off. Well, she'd have one of those in her hand, or mostly her, and if you dried up, which you didn't, but if you did, she would press that, and that deadened every bit of sound in the studio, and she or he would give you the line.
Give you the prompt, yes.
Like in the theatre.
Yeah, prompt.
Give you a prompt, yes. And then he'd take the finger off and on he would go. It had to be like that because it was live theatre. But if you really went badly in live television, if you really went badly in live television, you were done, you were sunk. And the show was sunk. And, I've seen it. Oh! My wife did that live. They decided to do another live Doctor Who, 3-4 years ago, whatever it was. Some crazy idea they'd do it live, and they did it live. And none of us are used to it. And one poor guy had a monumental dry in the middle of it, and there was no one who could help him out. It was a position where you couldn't say, I think you were going to say, John, that which is one of one's get out.
Yeah.
And it was so awful. So I thank God we don't do live television anymore. It imposed a tremendous strain. How do we get onto that? Was it your difficult question?
Well, probably, yeah.
It reminds me of a lovely story when it wasn't live television, but the very first episode of Z-Cars that I did. And again, I was quite young, and I was waiting for my entrance for my first scene. And just as the PA's finger went up to give me the cue, Jimmy Ellis came up behind me. He said, "Don't let the fact that there's 16 million people watching you worry you."
Cheers, Jimmy.
Oh, brilliant. Good old Jimmy.
Nice.
That's fun.
We didn't touch on with Julian the kind of success that is Game of Thrones, and your role in Game of Thrones. How did you get that? I know it's a bittersweet story, but how did you get for?
I got it by auditioning. I auditioned and didn't get it, and I auditioned and didn't get it, and I auditioned again and I didn't get it. All different parts. So I gave that one up. And then they rang me up and said, would I play this other part? Yes, I said, crying into my tea with gratitude. But then I discovered that the reason was because that fine actor, Roy de Treese, was going to play my part, and he got terribly ill, and he couldn't play it. So I walked, as I thought, into Dead Man's shoes. But I can tell this story now because, bless the Lord, he recovered and took another part in Game of Thrones, so I didn't feel badly about it at all. The fact he's now gone is another matter. But that's how I got Game of Thrones. And so I was able to, last time I saw him, which was about 6 months ago, no, a year ago, said, thank you very much for being ill. That suited me fine. I first met him in 1958 at Stratford.
Yes, me too.
Yeah, remember him in the old day? And he gave that wonderful performance of that old man. Private Lives. No, it doesn't matter. Stop.
Brief
Stop
lives.
gossiping.
Brief lives.
Brief Lives, that's right, yes.
Aubrey.
One-man show, yes.
Right,
anyway,
she was very
you'll
funny.
probably remember the actor. That's how that happened.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
he
I
was
got
asked...
6 series out of it, which was jolly nice.
Brilliant.
But I did have a problem at the end. Can I tell?
Of course, please. Yeah.
They asked me to do the last series, and I was so... I presume most of you have seen Game of Thrones, but for those of you who haven't, I'm sorry. I got fed up with being ticked off by Cersei all the time. That bloody bitch of a woman. And I said to the producers, I don't want to do anymore. I'm fed up with this, and because that's all I'm doing now. I have no function except to be ticked off, and it's tiresome. And they said, you've got to come and do the next series. And I said, no, I don't. Well, yes, we want you in the next series. I said, that's very nice of you. I said, but I don't want to do it because I know the same thing is going to happen again. And they said, well, we've got a good scene for you. And I said, oh, well, really, can I see it? And, oh, no, the secrecy. Secrecy, I can't tell you what it's like on Game of Thrones. It's unbelievable. You can't say a word about anything. Like, nobody knows what's going to happen in this last series, do they? Nobody knows. None of the actors said anything. Anyway, so I said, oh, if you can't even show it to the actor who's going to play it, goodbye. Well, I won't go into it, but I eventually did get to see a script, which was brought up in a motorbike with a locked back. They unlocked the back and they brought out a box, and there's a locked box. They brought it into my house and 3 pages of script, and I looked at it. Oh, yes, this is tasty. My death scene, and I said, okay, thank you very much. And he put it back and he locked it out, and off he drove. And I phoned my agent immediately. I said I'd like to do this. However, I'm so fed up with being ticked off by Cersei, which I know all the other scenes would be. So 2 conditions, that within reasonable time, I want to choose when I do these scenes, not when they can just ring me up the night before and say, come to Belfast on the midnight plane. I'll give them a week when I can do these scenes. And second is that for that episode, they tripled my money. And within half an hour, my agent was back saying, you're on.
Wow.
So, and I really didn't want to do that. And the moral of that story is, if you really don't want something, you'll probably get it.
That's absolutely right, yeah.
Yeah. It was quite a hard scene for you to film, I've
Yes,
read.
that
Quite
death
technical
scene.
and...
Yes, it was unpleasant. You couldn't see any of it there, but anybody who's seen it on the screen, well, it was a dark scene, but you could see it, and it was difficult technically because the irony of it was that I was the oldest character in the whole series, and I was killed by children, which is one of those things which Game of Thrones does, and you either notice it or you don't. It's a wonderful piece of irony. But the kids coming out of nowhere with these knives are all very enthusiastic. Yes, exactly. I'm really enthusiastic, and they all wanted to do it right. They all wanted to kill me. So that was it had to be placed extremely carefully. It looks a terrible mess, and it's meant to look a mess. Kids, stabs, me gradually going down. And then at the end, the great spurt of blood out of my... And that had to be done in one, because if I did the spurt of the blood once, my whole appearance was ruined, or the beard was ruined, and the costume was ruined, and all that. So you've got to get it in one, Julian, that last bit. Well, thank God, no, I filled my mouth with blood before I could spit it out. And thank God I managed to tip my head to the right angle at the end to spit the blood out. One shouldn't have to think about things like that when you're being killed by a lot of children. But I did get it right, thank God. The kids were all lovely. They adored doing it, but it was really a dangerous, and we had to be really carefully choreographed because Yes, well, because
Yeah. And now that you've gone in Game of Thrones, who do you think should sit on the Iron Throne?
no question. It should be Tyrion.
Hey.
But it won't be, of course, because he's the right one. It'll either be bloody Cersei all over again. Might be Jon Snow. That's so tiresome. He's such a goody two-shoes. Which his father wasn't. His father was simply his father was a really good man, Sean Bean. That character was a really good chap, and one knew that, and a man with faults and great worries, and a wonderful character. And that was another thing about Game of Thrones, that they killed him after the first episode. The first series. We couldn't believe it. When we read the scripts, we couldn't believe they killed off Hamlet in the middle of the play scene. And they did. And I had to read my script again to make quite sure that I hadn't missed anything out, which said, of course, he wasn't killed. When I got to the end, he was killed. He had his head chopped off. We simply could not believe it, even the actors themselves. And what a bonus, because that character lives on and on and on and on, partly personified by Jon Snow. Let it not be Daenerys, and let it not be a dragon. That fantastic series. Let it be someone really interesting who's full of faults but has got a wonderful mind, and that's Tyrion. He's a fine actor too, isn't he? Yeah. Sorry, you haven't seen it. They were saying, his wife and he were saying, "Oh, we've never seen it outside," and she was saying, "Well, we really ought to get the box set and see it." And I just know that I've met many people who said we haven't seen it because we don't want to see it. That's not his reason. Because I can't be bothered with that. And I've known them start watching it and not being able to put it down. They go out and buy the box set 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 5. And watch it. They buy a crate of whiskey and just sit and watch the whole damn thing, don't they? Don't you?
Can't wait.
And you're already got your nose straight into the last series. I thought the first episode was rather boring, wasn't it? But it'll wind up.
Has anybody got any questions for Julian and Ian?
Particularly for
Yes,
Ian.
for Ian.
I've done all mine.
Question, yes, please.
We love questions. Get the microphone. There he goes.
Oh, pippa passes.
Hello. This question is largely for Ian because of the Aztecs, but knowing Julian has played roles along this line too, it's to the panel generally. Do you find it different preparing for a historical character from a period that isn't generally done in the theatre? I mean, we've got the Shakespeare tradition, we've got kind of the history play tradition, but Aztecs and similar are not, is it a case of that you kind of become, think, well, all human, nothing human is alien to me, or does it require different sorts of prep and research and getting into a different mindset?
It requires a certain amount of research, but most of the research, to be fair, is usually done by the writer and the director, if they're good at their jobs. I think what I've said before is actually it's the same answer in a sense. That what you've got to do is believe it and be true to it, and then it works. And it doesn't really matter what sort of costume you're wearing or what period you're working in. The great mistake is to go into some sort of, this is my historical performance mode.
Yeah.
I always if you watch, there are many Robin Hood films, and some of them are great, not many, but 1 or 2 of them are great films. Most of them are pretty awful because people are all doing their historical acting bit, and they're not actually being truthful at all. And I blame the director. I watched one the other day. I can't remember now who it was, but the acting was awful. That's the only thing one could say about it. But it was the director's fault because he'd set the tone that he wanted, obviously. Or else the actors took over. I don't know, that might have happened.
Tell that wonderful thing you told me in the Greenham just now about your children. You're playing Cheerio children.
Oh, yeah.
3 sisters.
Well, yeah. For about 35 years, my wife and I ran a children's theatre group. And we were fairly ambitious. The first play that we did was Waiting for Godot. And the next one that we did was The Cherry Orchard, which we took to Germany. But The Cherry Orchard in particular, I say this in all modesty, it's by far the best production of The Cherry Orchard I've ever seen, because it was absolutely clean. The kids just did it and told the story, and there was nobody trying to be Russian or trying to imitate the National Theatre of Russia or anything like that. They just did it and they believed in it totally, thoroughly enjoyed it, and it was a magical production because it was so simple. And I think it's the great lesson to be learned there. That's what I was saying, really. That just play it for truth, go for it, and believe it. And
if you look back,
the acting looks after
your
itself.
Theatre going or film experience, and you reflect on performances you enjoyed, most of them you will realise are terribly simple, deeply thought out underneath, but terribly simple what you see, and that's the key. It's the key, and it's a difficult key to turn. You want to get up there and be elaborate, but you mustn't. Just keep it simple. Just do it as these children.
And you might be surprised by this. But one of the actors that I've always admired, long dead now, bless his heart. But speaking of Robin Hood, was Errol Flynn.
Yeah, oh yes.
Who could do the most extraordinary, bizarre things absolutely truthfully. And Burt Lancaster was another one. That they could do things that were way over the top, and the temptation to go over the top must have been phenomenal. But they just did them and believed them and gave everything to it, and they live on. Those performances, those film performances, live on and on and on and on. I hope this answers your question.
Yes, Alan.
Both Ian and Julian appeared in Blake 7. Julian was in a story called Breakdown, where he played a surgeon called Professor Kane. And you, Ian, you appeared as a Federation officer with Stephen Greif. What are your recollections of that series?
What was the second one?
Sorry, what was the question?
What was the second half of the question? Stephen Greif?
Ian appeared with Stephen
Ian
Greif,
did.
yeah.
Yes, I did. Yes, that's it. That was an odd one because that came my way. It's rather like your story. Came my way because it was actually it was a tiny part, a very small part, but it was a difficult technical speech. Now I'd done a lot of that in Emergency Ward 10. I'd been a surgeon for many years, so I was quite used to difficult technical speeches. But the actor who'd been cast in this part couldn't do it. He couldn't get this speech, couldn't remember it. And in those days, of course, they didn't chop everything up the way they do now. You had to do it. It was speech. And he couldn't do it. So the director rang me, he was a friend of mine, he rang me and said, "I think you could come in and do this." And so they sent me the speech over by messenger, and I learned it that night and went in and just did it. I mean, I could, because of the previous experience. But it was pure replacing somebody who couldn't actually get their mind round these difficult technical words. A lot of that in Doctor Who, wasn't there? A lot of technical stuff in Doctor Who.
Yeah.
That various Doctor Who's have had to cope with.
Yes, definitely.
Better them than me.
And Julian, what are your memories of Blake 7
My
and Kane and
memories of
hands?
Blake 7 are 0.
Very good.
Really?
Yes.
Yes. I can't remember anything about it at all. Except the actors. I remember the actors.
Paul Darrow, I remember Paul.
Paul, yes. And I worked with Paul later.
So did I, yes.
Did you?
Very
He
fine
was
actor,
super.
yes.
He's gone now, you know.
No.
Yeah.
Paul. I did a thing called Dombey and Son, the Dickens book, and he played my servant, as it were, evil servant. Brilliant. We adored Paul.
He was a great actor.
Really good actor, really good actor.
I think...
But he died, like we all do.
No, he hasn't.
Not yet.
Not yet. So
He has, Paul has.
No,
Hasn't he?
no,
I thought he'd gone.
no.
Oh.
Paul's still here. Paul's still around.
He lived in Peasley.
Yeah, he's still around.
How wonderful.
I thought. Resurrected.
Yay! Proud of everything. He has risen, yeah.
He's risen.
Yes,
I
yes.
thought he'd gone.
Well, I think time has beaten us because I can see the next lot congregating in the TARDIS because I have X-ray eyes.
right.
So I'd like to
Oh,
thank
what a shame.
everybody for their...
400 people in there.
yeah. Amazing. Everybody for your attention and for Julian and Ian for being such wonderful raconteurs and making the last hour and a half an absolute joy to sit here. Don't forget they will be signing The Matrix, which is the one over there, along with Kate Walsh, Una and I think Chris as well, so don't forget that. And just big round of applause, please. For Mr. Barnfather.
You never got to ask a question.
Sorry.